All right, hi everyone. Welcome to the second week of the Building Energy Efficiency short course. I am leading most of the discussion today. I'm Karen. Rob wasn't able to make it today, and Erin will be here later to talk some about commercial buildings. But my main focus is in energy retrofits in single-family homes and multifamily homes. So that's what I'm going to be talking about with you today. Just as a quick note, you all should have received an email talking about your assignment before today's class. You were supposed to look at maybe 3 areas in your house, your dorm, or your engineering building, anything like that, that could use some, that maybe aren't super energy efficient and could use some work. So this is just a reminder that if you haven't done a slide for that yet, you can put it up now while we're talking. And we'll be talking about that throughout the entire course, so I look forward to that. All right, so this is week 2, existing buildings and retrofits. And we're going to start by talking about one of the smaller buildings that you can retrofit, which is a single-family home. So I know a lot of you have probably heard about some of the easier ways to retrofit your home, whether it's with lighting, or any quick things like that. So I wanted to get a little bit deeper and instead talk about some diagnostic tools for finding things that are a little more in-depth than that. So these are a couple of tools that I'm going to talk about. The first one on the left, these are images from an infrared camera. So basically what you're looking for here is you're looking for heat flow through a building's flaws. So any gaps in the baseboard, any lack of insulation anywhere, you'll be able to see that with a much colder temperature. So you're looking for a temperature difference, basically. But in addition to that, you're looking for fingers of cold air, and you can kind of see that here on the top left. This is a baseboard in one of the buildings I've been to. So you can see not only is there a lot of cold space right here, but it's also infiltrating into the building. So that's a good example of an area that could be sealed to prevent problems like that. I also, below that, have a picture of an uninsulated roof. So you can kind of, this was taken during the winter. It's really cold out, and you can see how the cold air is coming into the building and creating some problems there with, it's making sure that the building is just not very evenly heated, so you get a lot of problems there. And then another diagnostic tool that you probably have not heard of unless we sent a video out about it. It's called a blower door. So basically this arrangement right here is this fan that blows air out of a house. So basically it depressurizes the house by blowing air out, creating a vacuum inside. So a good analogy for this is looking at inflating a leaky beach ball. So if the beach ball has no holes, not a lot of air is required to fill it. It fills it and it stays in. But a beach ball with smaller holes would require a small but steady stream of air to keep it fully inflated, and the more holes there are, the more air is required. So this blower door test can tell you a lot about what's going on in the building with respect to air leakage. Qualitatively, once you have depressurized the home, you can move around and look and see exactly what's going on. You can actually feel air moving in through leaks, like around windows, in the baseboards, by the attic, all sorts of things. But then quantitatively, you can also measure air volume out through the fan. When you're blowing the fan, you set it to a specific pressure, 50 pascals, negative house pressure, and then measure the cubic feet per minute of air that's blowing through that. And you can use that to compare it to buildings of similar size and see how leaky it is compared to buildings of the same age, same area, things like that. You can also look at the number of air changes per hour, which is just another way of looking at exactly what the air leakage is. And then another kind of quantitative approach, but it's a little hand-wavy, is looking at the approximate leakage area of the house in square inches, which is kind of a conversion from the leakage in cubic feet per minute. So that kind of tells you, like, oh, I'm looking for maybe 12 square inches of leaks that you can find in a variety of places. You can find them in baseboards, you can find them in the attic, in the basement, just all over the place. And I'll talk about that a little more in this next slide. So one of the something that's really important with single-family homes is looking at air sealing and insulation. So first I'm going to focus on air sealing. Basically, air leakage is caused by two things. It's caused by a hole between the inside and outside, and it's caused by a pressure used to push air through the hole. So the hole is pretty self-explanatory. It occurs at windows, doors, seams like the wall and floor cavities, recessed sites, all sorts of things. And then also at intermediate zones like attics, basements, crawl spaces. But the pressure difference is a little more interesting. This occurs from this building energy thing called stack effect, which is basically talking about convection of air. So we know that hot air rises because it's less dense than cooler air. And as it rises through a building, it will leave through holes in the attic, things like that, and it will cause cooler outdoor air to infiltrate in the bottom of the building to replace it. This is all during the heating season. When it's cooling, it kind of goes the other way. Hot air leaves, or hot air enters in and heats the building up. So there's a pressure difference throughout the building. There's a lower pressure that causes air to come in at the bottom, and it leaves through the top. So when you're looking at sealing a building, you have to focus on how to both fix these two problems of air leakage, the holes and the pressure. And while you could go through the building and look at every single hole that could possibly be there, really what you should be doing is focusing on bigger leaks and leaks that are at points of high pressure, so in the basement and in the attic. So what I have here on the picture of the left is a building that I went to that I helped retrofit. I didn't do this work myself, but you can see all of this kind of pink stuff here along the bottom in these like little areas. This is in the attic. So basically, this is spray foam that was used to seal any parts of the building that was causing infiltration. And this is at the top part of the house, so it's kind of reducing the stack effect and preventing air from moving through it really quickly. And that can be done at many different parts of the house with many different types of materials. But there's a problem with this, and that's that too much air sealing will prevent the house from being ventilated properly. If you just seal up every square inch that is open, then things like combustion products, smoke, moisture, they'll all stay in the house. So if you're going to be air sealing your home so it's super tight, you have to address this by adding mechanical ventilation, so getting fans that blow indoor air out and replace it with fresh outdoor air. So then the other part of this I want to talk about is insulation. So with insulation, you're kind of reducing all three forms of heat transfer. You're reducing radiation and convection within empty cavities, like within the wall in the attic, and then you're also forcing heat to conduct through foams or fibers or pockets of air, and those are all poor conductors compared to like a slab of wood or metal or anything like that. And generally, insulation materials have millions of tiny air pockets to slow heat transmission. So things like fiberglass, cellulose, expandable polystyrene, which you might know as styrofoam, are all really good insulators because they are just full of little tiny pockets of air and they just make heat transfer really slow. So you might know that insulation is measured in what's called R values, or thermal resistance. And one important thing to consider here is that insulation must be continuous to ensure a maximum R value. If you have maybe half of your wall insulated, the heat will just will flow through the easiest path, which will be the completely empty space. So essentially you're not doing all that much by only insulating half of it. So having a continuous insulation barrier is the best way to prevent excess heat conduction. So I have another example of this. This is the picture on the right here. This type of insulation is blown cellulose. So it's these basically fire-resistant recycled newspaper. Has a really high R value, and it's an excellent choice for an attic that, especially in the multifamily buildings that I see, that you never have to go into. You just blow this stuff up in there, close the attic, and it prevents all sorts of issues with heat within the building. It keeps heat in during the summer. It reduces stack effect, so you don't have the hot air rising nearly as much, meaning the building is more evenly heated throughout all the floors. It's just a great way to save energy throughout the whole building and keep everyone in the building way more comfortable. All right, so this is kind of what I wanted to talk about single-family homes, and I wanted to break and see if any of you guys had examples from your from the other section of slides. See if you have any problems in single-family homes that you wanted to talk about that you might have any good solutions for after listening to that. So let me look at these slides and see if there's a good example. So Cecilia, it looks like you have talked about a single-family home. So I'm going to put you off mute and see if you want to talk about any of the things going on in your home.
Hello, everybody.
Hey.
Yes. So I went down, and my first thing to think about was the water heater pipes, because I'm actually part of PIT CSW chapter, and my project team, I was working with Sage, and we kind of did like home energy audits, and we would usually go look at the water heater pipes. So unfortunately, I probably should have done this in my house, but I went down and looked at those, and our water heater pipes have no like foam or anything around them, which can help obviously reduce energy loss through that. And then I was reading up on the internet about like appliances and those kind of things, and I realized, thought about the fact that all the appliances in our house are like electric run, in terms of like the water heater and like the dryer.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of energy loss through that, just through transmission. And then I just thought a little bit about water usage, and so our toilets are like not the most efficient.
Yeah, those are all really interesting. So in my work, I deal with buildings that are both electrically heated and gas heated. And one thing we find is like the price of natural gas is so much cheaper here in Illinois that people that are having their homes run by electricity are just paying so much for it. And unless you're installing expensive heat pumps and all that, there's not all that much you can do to improve the efficiency. Let's see. Troy, do you want to talk about your building?
Yeah. Is my mic on?
Yes.
Okay, so this house has a landlord that does not care about it very much. It's in the middle of a college campus. I put some of the things on there. It's overall in pretty bad condition, just pretty dilapidated and kind of falling apart. Most of what is readily noticeable is the cracked everything from the outside to the inside. A lot of cold air gets in the winter, and a lot of warm air is poorly ventilated through in the summer. And this goes from anything to the interfaces of the corners of the walls to some of the rooms in the house not being insulated at all because they were added on and done carelessly. And then just some of the windows window frames are cracked, and most all of the windows are single pane. Yeah, it's just generally in a poor condition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a lot of that looks like problems that could be solved with a lot of air sealing and insulation, which is pretty cool. The windows are interesting. Part of what I do is make sure that building owners are making choices that will pay off for them over time. So basically within the lifetime of their window or their insulation or anything like that, the cost of the upgrade will be offset by the energy savings. And one interesting thing is with windows, you don't see that a lot because ultimately, like, they're never going to be an effective barrier against, like, preventing the cold from coming in or anything like that. But you can do your best to air seal around them, and I mean, Troy, your windows are pretty old, single pane, can usually be replaced pretty easily. So yeah, that's a really good example.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So next I'm going to move on to talking about multifamily homes, which is what my area of expertise is. These are the buildings that I'm going into every day in the city of Chicago. So all of the stuff I just said about air sealing and insulation definitely applies to multifamily housing as well. It's a little bit different because it's a building owner that is focused more on the bottom line than like really being energy efficient and all that. So you're looking at things, like I said, that pay off for themselves relatively quickly. So looking for every tiny place that you could air seal is maybe not the best choice here, but focusing on adding roof cavity insulation is a really good choice. It's pretty minimally disruptive to tenants. You can get it done within a day or two, depending on the size. And like all you really need to do is drill a hole that you can fit a hose that puts the blown-in fiberglass into. That's all you need to do. Whereas things like wall insulation are a lot more invasive, and you pretty much need to have no tenants in there to be making that kind of improvement. So what I want to focus on in multifamily housing is the heating systems. There are all types that you can see in like every type of heating system you can see. Usually I see gas systems and electric systems. The electric ones are a little less interesting to talk about because they're mostly electric resistance heating and there's not all that much you can do to improve their efficiency. But the gas heated systems are pretty cool. So if you have a lot of spare capital lying around, a good way to save a ton of energy is to switch to a high efficiency model for a gas furnace, for a boiler, a heat pump, anything like that. So there are a lot of ways to heat a space. These all use combustion to heat either air, in the case of furnaces, or water, or converting water to steam, and that's what flows through radiators, water, steam. And you can improve the efficiency of all of these. Basically, you're improving the efficiency of the system by looking at the combustion itself and trying to improve the efficiency of the combustion. And one really cool way to do that is in a hot water system with what's called a condensing boiler. So what this does, and this chart on the right kind of explains it a little bit, is generally a hot water system, you're heating up water with flue gases, sending it out to the radiators in the building. The radiators let off heat, the water cools down, it goes back to the boiler and it's heated up again. It's a closed loop system. So what the condensing boiler does differently is that it recovers the heat of vaporization from the flue gas. So the flue gas preheats the water entering the boiler, and the water vapor in the flue gas is condensed. And you guys are engineers, you know that the latent heat of vaporization, to do a phase change from gas to liquid, there's a lot of heat there. So you're able to heat up the water that's going out to the building to a lot higher temperature. There's a lot more heat exchange going on. And so you can kind of see here at the dew point for water vapor and flue gases at 130 degrees Fahrenheit, your efficiency of the boiler goes way up. Without condensing, you can only get to about 87% combustion efficiency, but after that, the temperature of the water, the lower it gets when it's coming back to the boiler, the higher the efficiency gets, and you can get up to practically 96, 97% combustion efficiency, which is amazing. But the problem with this technology that we run into a lot is it's really expensive. Building owners oftentimes don't really have a way to pay for this. So what we want to do instead of focusing on the combustion efficiency is looking at the system efficiency, at maximizing heat delivery to the units. And one quick note here, you might notice that I'm not talking about cooling a lot, and that's because I live in Chicago. It's really cold most of the time, and cooling systems are not very common. Occasionally we'll see air conditioning units, just window units in the buildings, but there's not a lot you can do there, so I'm focusing mainly on the heating. So the first thing you can do to improve the system efficiency is insulate the pipes or the ducts. So basically, you're making sure that more of the heat generated from combustion is sent to the place that needs to be heated, making sure it's not lost to space in the basement where the pipes are or the attic where the duct is. So you can kind of see this in the chart on the left. As your insulation thickness increases, aka you're increasing the R value, you lose a lot less heat to your surrounding environment. So one caveat to this is that pipe insulation is a technology that's been around for a while. So a lot of the older stuff has asbestos, and that's what you can see in this middle picture here. Any of this corrugated cardboard, sort of looking old pipe insulation has asbestos in it, most likely. So asbestos is a really effective insulation material. It has a higher R value per inch than what we currently use, which is fiberglass, but as you all know, it's also a big health hazard. So if we see it, especially if it's cut open like this, we definitely recommend replacing it, putting in this nice looking wrapped fiberglass insulation instead. And this is a good example of how much pipe is around that can be insulated. Like, it's just everywhere in this picture. And this is for a steam system. And it's making sure that the steam is actually getting to the radiators, it's not condensing before it gets there, and that helps keep the building heated more evenly. It helps make sure that the steam doesn't condense in the water before it gets there, and therefore it prevents all sorts of problems. And then one other thing you can do to improve the heating is look at how the heating system is controlled. And I have 3 examples here based on 3 different types of systems. So the first one on the left is programmable thermostats, and you see these mainly with forced air furnaces. Basically, you're controlling what temperature your space is at based on the day of the week and the time of day, so you can keep it cooler when you're at work in the winter, keep it at a lower temperature, have it cool down a little bit when you're asleep and it doesn't matter, or if it's summer and you're away, keep it hotter so that you're not just heating or cooling a space that no one's using. And then on the bottom here, smarter models like Nest can be adjusted remotely. They take outdoor temperature into account, all sorts of things. So those are some really cool technologies with furnaces. For hot water boilers, one thing you can do is make sure that the temperature of the hot water boiler is the optimum based on the outdoor temperature. So basically, if the outdoor temperature is higher, so like it's maybe 40 degrees out, it's not super cold, but you still need to be heating your building, the water temperature will be maybe at like 120 degrees. When the maximum it can be is 170. So this makes sure that when you're heating your building, you're not heating it too much. If you're heating it too much, tenants are going to start opening their windows and they're not going to be happy. There's just all sorts of problems there. You're overheating it, you're spending too much money, and no one is comfortable. And then on the right here, we have an averaging control system for steam boilers. So what this one does is it has several sensors, which you can kind of see on the left there. And these sensors are located throughout the building in units. And what they do is they record the temperature of that unit. This thing here takes an average of those sensors. And when it's below a set temperature, it tells the boiler to turn on and start heating the building. And then it tells it to turn off when it hits above that temperature. So it's kind of like a thermostat, but it's doing an average for the whole building. It can also do more advanced things, like if a tenant opens a window. Hold on, sorry. I'm in the office and we have a motion sensor and the lights just went out, so I will be right back. Sorry about that. So basically, it makes sure that the building is not overheated. It makes sure it's evenly heated overall. Although if your system is super imbalanced and different units are getting way different amounts of heat delivery, this is not going to be enough to fix it. And I would love to talk about steam balancing systems, but it would bore you all to death. It's really complicated. There's just so much to learn. So we're not going to talk about that. But if you're interested, maybe come to the session, maybe talk to me later, send me an email, anything like that. So I'm going to talk about one more thing related to multifamily buildings, and that is verification of energy savings. So this is something my company does to make sure that we're recommending things that really make sense for buildings, and then following up to make sure they actually do make a difference. So when you're looking at verification of energy, you would probably start by looking at your gas and electricity bills. Look at what they were before you did a change and then what they were after. So you might be able to see a difference that way, but you're not comparing apples to apples. The two seasons that you're looking at, maybe one was way colder than the other, maybe there are different tenants, all sorts of things. So what you need to do to make sure you're comparing the right data is look at the EUI, or the energy use intensity. So basically what this is it's weather normalized energy use divided by the square footage of the building. You weather normalize it by looking at these things called heating degree days, which is basically like the amount of time the local climate is below a certain temperature. So this allows you to compare buildings with different areas from different time points. So you can say like, oh, our average building in this program has an EUI of 107. You can kind of see that here. And you can also compare a building before and after it gets retrofits. And you can see that on these two charts on the left. So basically, this is this building here in Chicago, and it got these upgrades. It got air sealing and insulation in the roof cavity. It replaced its boiler with a high-efficiency model, and it added insulation to its heating pipes and to its hot water pipes. So it had a really high EUI before all these upgrades. It was about 200 kilobtu's per foot squared per year. And then post-upgrade, it was down to 115. So that's about 41% savings in gas energy. And that's a lot, but it's still higher than your average steam building, and we kind of have to look at why that is. A lot of the buildings we see are 100% residential. They're just entirely living areas. This one, it looks like it has a restaurant and maybe a couple of other commercial units, so that might be the reason for the higher energy use. But still, they saved 41% on their gas bill, and that is pretty awesome. So that is all I had for multifamily apartment buildings. I'm going to see if any of you have, do any of you have examples from your dorms or anything like that that used a lot of energy? If you do, raise your hand. If not, I have an example from my dorm a few years ago. Okay, so my example was the dorm I lived in sophomore year, and I don't have a picture, but like Troy's building, it had really drafty windows and doors. But one of the main problems that I saw was that the top floor was way hotter than the first floor. So that's something that air sealing and insulation would help with. It would reduce the stack effect, so hot air would be going through the building a little less quickly, and we wouldn't have excessively hot units that we needed to open our windows for because we had no control over them. And then one other thing is that we forgot to turn the bathroom light off all the time, and this is an example of a lighting upgrade. That would have been a good use of a motion sensor, things like that, although as you saw just a few minutes ago, motion sensors can be a little problematic. I guess I wasn't moving around enough for the one in my office. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my co-presenter, Erin, who's going to talk about commercial buildings.
Hi, everyone, and I'm going to introduce myself a little bit first since I wasn't able to join you last week. And as you can see from that picture on the first page, or the first page with all the instructors and my pictures. I have a small baby that goes to bed right around this time, so I won't always be here, but I hope to be able to jump in here and there to help Karen and Rob with the course. So I have a background in mechanical engineering. I worked for an engineering consulting firm doing energy modeling and HVAC design before going back to school for a PhD. And so I actually did a lot on commercial buildings while I did this. I did mainly office buildings along with hospitals and universities, which have some unique challenges that you don't see in residential or single-family buildings. Next slide, please. Okay, so some of the challenges with commercial building retrofits, one is that these are really large buildings. They have very complex HVAC systems. Basically, the bigger you get, the more complex they get, and especially when you're thinking of things like hospitals, you have areas where you're containing people that have communicable diseases, so you have to be really careful with the building pressure. You want negative pressure within the room so that air is being sucked into that room, not being pushed out. The last thing you want is air that sick people are breathing, going out through cracks and doors and ending up all over the hospital, as well with dealing with things like you have fume hoods in there for areas where people are maybe doing research or working with chemicals, and you just have a very big system, so a lot of different air handlers, multiple different heating systems, things like process water, cooling towers. So the larger the buildings are, they tend to have a higher upfront cost to the owner to do some of these types of retrofits. And what it means if they have a high upfront cost, it also means they tend to have a longer payback period when you do a major upgrade. So this means it'll take you more time to get back the money in energy savings that you're investing upfront to do this. And so one of the main problems with this is Troy kind of hinted on this when he talked about his landlord doesn't really care about the building. Sometimes if you have renters using a commercial space that are paying for the energy, and it's not the owner themselves that are paying for the energy, there's not a lot of incentive, or not as much incentive for the owner to take on these retrofits, because it's not them that are actually going to be getting the cost savings. It's going to be their renters who are paying those energy bills. And the same thing happens in a residential situation too sometimes if you have a renter and your tenants take on paying the energy bills and the owners don't. So there's not as much incentive of the owners to take on those costs. So one of the main things that's done to help overcome these challenges is that there are a lot of financial incentives out there to encourage people to take these challenges on, to take on retrofitting. Next slide, please. And so what this is a database, a state database for incentives for renewable energy. It has sort of the awkward acronym of DSIRE. It sounds more like an online dating site than a site to find energy saving incentives, but that's what it is. And this isn't just for commercial, actually. This is for all types of incentives. So I put a few screenshots here. So the picture on the left is sort of the home page that you see when you get there, and you can search either by state or by zip code. So I live in Troy, New York. I put my zip code in here. And when it came up, I think it told me I had 63 different programs in my area relating to energy incentives. And so you see this list on the right here. There's a whole bunch of different things. There are grants that give people money to do energy retrofits. There are renewable energy tax credits for residential areas. You can see one about 2/3 of the way down is the commercial industrial incentive program. So that one's specific to commercial and industrial buildings. Photovoltaic incentive programs that give people payback to help them cover those big upfront costs that might prevent people from doing these retrofits otherwise. There's one right below it for wind. So I would actually encourage you to check this out for your local area. You might be surprised at how many incentives there are out there. And if you are a homeowner, or if maybe your parents own a house, or you're trying to encourage your campus or someone to take on an energy retrofit, there's a lot of funding out there to help people do that. That makes a pretty big difference and make things a lot more affordable. Next slide. So one example here for commercial buildings is from NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. I also used to work there as well, so I know a little bit about these types of incentives. And so for things like this, they have two different paths. One is for small types of equipment changes, that's on the left. The second is for larger, more custom improvements, sort of the bigger deal improvements, and we'll kind of talk about the difference between those two in the next few slides. And you basically have to put together an application saying what it is you want to do and what sort of changes you're planning to make, whether it's replacing lights, replacing your equipment, or putting in a building management system. And if you get approval, you can get paid for it. So here they have incentives up to $60,000 for commercial buildings doing energy updates. Next slide, please. So just like with single-family or multifamily residential buildings, people tend to go for sort of like the low-hanging fruit and the basic retrofits. These are sometimes referred to as standard retrofits, and those can be, in addition to some of the things Karen mentioned, like improving insulation. These can be things like installing building management systems, which are also called building automation systems. And that's kind of like what Karen talked about that you can do on a residential scale, but on a much bigger scale. So this picture down here on the right, sorry, it's in Russian for whatever reason. That was the best image I found on the internet. It happened to be in Russian. So this is a computer program that kind of shows all of your HVAC equipment and your process water, anything, electricity, whatever you have in the building. And in addition to being able to set things like use occupancy sensors and set certain temperatures you want to run at certain times of the day, you can remotely monitor and manage all of this. So a lot of the times it'll be engineering consulting firms actually will have access to buildings where they've done the retrofits. So the company I worked at, for example, we'd done a big hospital, and we could pull up on the computers in our office all the hospital equipment and this type of screen. So if they were having a problem with one of their air handlers, we could really quickly jump on and say, okay, I can see that it's this particular air handler, and this seems to be what's going wrong, and the temperature is too low as a result of that. So it's a nice, easy way to quickly see problems and to quickly regulate things. And if something happens and things get left running when the building's unoccupied, you can remotely change it. In addition, it also does a really good job of tracking your energy use and can make for some nice graphs and some of those things that Karen talked about that help you sort of monitor and compare your buildings to other buildings. So another type of retrofit that I saw a lot, again, something I would call the low-hanging fruit, is by updating lighting to CFLs or LED lighting. This tends to be fairly easy to do, especially in an office building. It's very common just to replace the lights and the ballasts, and that gives you a pretty big energy savings fairly quickly. I think this was talked about last week, but it's around 30% of building energy use comes from lighting. Karen, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that sounds about right. So some other simple things that commercial buildings will do is, use the new high energy HVAC equipment, update their equipment, and use office equipment that has lower energy use and water use as well. I don't really mention that here, but things like, dual flush toilets, low flow shower heads in areas where you have showers. And things to the building envelope, like adding insulation, and even something simple such as window shading, adding pull-down window shades. Even better, adding automatic window shades that can adjust when the sun is coming in the building and you need to keep it cool, or raise up when the sun is out and it's winter and you want to let more light into the building. Those are some of the basic, more commonly done commercial retrofits. So typically what happens with a commercial building is they go to an engineering consulting firm and they say, we want to do some retrofits. We don't quite know what we want to do. And the engineering firm will give them a whole big list of all the different possible things they can do. And this is what your payback period will be if you do X, Y, and Z. And in my experience, the types of things on this page are the things that have a shorter payback period and are those things that companies tend to say, okay, we'll take on this as a retrofit. So on the next slide, I talk briefly about some of the other things that, energy companies, engineering firms want to recommend because they're cool and they're, greener, and you can have even more energy savings. But they can be really expensive for commercial buildings, and a lot of them involve significant, structural work and major changes, so they're not as easy. So because of this, these types of retrofits are sometimes referred to as deep retrofits. So again, there's a ton of different things here. One of the big ones you see is buildings putting photovoltaic systems on the roof. I didn't put a picture of that here because we've all seen that. A few other different cool ones that you guys have probably actually heard of a lot of these as well. Green roofs here, this picture on the left. is an office building that has a green roof installed. So green roofs are great because they help regulate the temperature of the building. They keep heat or cool air from being lost to the outside. And they're also good for stormwater runoff management. So instead of all this water pouring down into the streets and into the storm drains, some of it's being absorbed into the roof, the plant material on the roof. Limitations here is you need to have a stable, strong enough roof structure that it can support the extra weight that putting soil on top of your roof creates. So the one here on the right is another roof solution. This is called a cool roof. This is, again, something you can look up online. And this is a type of roofing system where there's actually an airspace in between the interior roof surface and the shingles. And so this airspace, just like having a double pane window, can help prevent energy loss in the building or cool air loss. This is a roof system that sort of does the same thing. And in the summer, it can help generate a cooling effect by providing ventilation going along the edge of the roof, and it can keep the buildings up to 10 degrees cooler in the summer, and it helps to retain warmth that acts as an insulating layer in the winter. So another system that, again, would involve more than just a basic retrofit because it involves somewhat changing the structure of a building is an underfloor air distribution system. So as Karen mentioned, hot air rises, but we tend to have these buildings where we're pumping hot air out of the ceiling level down to people on the floor. A lot of that air is never even reaching as far to the floor as we want, or we're having to pump a lot more of it because it's rising back up. So an underfloor air distribution system, the air and the air handlers typically are stored below the floor, and the air comes from a plenum underneath the floor with distribution vents in the floor, so it passes up, heats up as it passes through the workspace and gains heat from people and computers, and goes up to the top and passes out. So this is another way that buildings can lower their heating and cooling costs. Next slide, please. So I grabbed an example off of line of a deep commercial retrofit. This is a building called the Alliance Center. It's a nonprofit organization in Colorado. And I thought this was an important example because it is a 100-year-old building. It's much easier to see what you could do when you're thinking about a newer building that maybe already has some of these basic things in place. But it's also possible to do pretty significant retrofits for an older building. And so I tried to, there's a lot of information going on this page, but over on the right side on the key measures, they talk about some of the things that they did here, installing high efficiency glazing, so windows, replacing lamps with dimmable ballast, increasing insulation, putting in sunshades, and involving installing a building automation system, occupancy sensors. And so the part where I put the red square, so they talk about these energy upgrades have resulted in 22% reduced energy consumption, but over this time that they've reduced their energy use, 22%, occupancy has actually doubled. And that's why what Karen was talking about, the energy use intensity, is really important to look at. So this one that you see in that line below, they say the building uses 39% less energy when compared to comparable office buildings. So that's what you really want to be looking at. How does it do in comparison to other buildings, not how does it do in comparison to itself, because like she said, you could have had a particularly cold winter, you could have different use, a lot of things can change over that time. And so I mentioned one of the limitations sometimes being payback. In this one you see here I have a red circle. The payback is 13.3 years, which isn't a super quick payback, but it's not too long either. Photovoltaic cells especially tend to have a very long payback period, but as that technology gets cheaper and cheaper, that payback period will get shorter. And you can also see right above they have a line for total project costs, and then they also have a line energy efficiency financial incentives and other incentives. So by using some of those incentives, like the ones I talked about that you can find on that site, they were able to get $50,000, or almost a third of their project costs, taken off. And so the total cost to the owner ended up being $117,000 instead of around $170,000. And I think that's all for me. So Karen, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right. Before moving on from commercial buildings, I saw one example in the activity slides of a good office building. So I'm going to pull that up right now. Delora, do you want to talk about some of the problems that your office building is having and maybe some of your ideas of how to fix it?
Sure. So I think the first two problems, it just has to do with the windows, and it's something that I didn't think they thought very much about when they planned this building and how they distributed the offices, because we have half of our offices where one wall is entirely windows, and half of them have no windows. So half the offices have to use lighting all day to turn on their lights when the other half don't. And just having these big windows in some of the offices means that it gets really hot at certain parts of the day. And so I think those offices could really benefit from some sort of shading. And the other big problem is that some of the floors are basement floors, and even though they're basement floors and have no lighting, they have no light sensors either. So a lot of the lights end up being turned on all day long, even though no one's using the computer labs or the bathrooms, and it's a pretty large building with the lights on all of the time.
Oh yeah, thanks for sharing. You see a lot of problems like that in offices. My office is pretty cool. We do have motion sensors in most of the sections, but there are definitely areas that have no windows at all, and it can get a little depressing. And so yeah, thank you for talking about that. So I have one last piece of information before we're done for tonight, and that is what life as an energy auditor is like. So there's a lot of what we've just been talking about, like looking for various retrofits and all that, but it really extends a lot beyond that, sort of to what Erin was talking about with rebates and incentives and all that. So I just kind of wanted to go through that and like tell you how I got to be an energy auditor, what the process is like, and what sort of like stakeholders I'm working with on a day-to-day basis. So you can see me on the right looking a little awkward. This was taken by a colleague who was trying to take a picture of the furnace at the same time I was, so I think we mostly just ended up taking pictures of each other. But this is kind of the first step of doing the energy audit process, is actually looking at the building itself, like making sure we know all the information we can about the heating system, the hot water system, all those sorts of things. But that's really the shortest part of our process time-wise. We go back to the office, we analyze the energy use like I talked about before, and then we are making recommendations to the building owners and helping them through the rest of the process. So one important thing for energy audits is that you need to be certified to really be making sure that you're doing the right thing and making recommendations that make sense. So I have a certification from the Building Performance Institute. I'm a certified energy analyst, which means I can do the audits, and I'm also an envelope professional, which means that I can recommend air sealing and insulation measures like as necessary, like the correct materials for the correct situation. So once we're done with the audit, we write a report detailing like, you should do roof cavity insulation. It costs this much. These are the annual savings you're going to see in both gas and electricity bills. And that means you have a payback period of this many years. And we also give building owners an SIR, a savings to investment ratio, which is basically saying how many times this retrofit will pay for itself over its lifetime. So from there, building owners are usually pretty skeptical. They'll kind of worry that it's really expensive, that they don't have the money to do it. And so I've highlighted a lot of ways that we can help them address that. So the City of Chicago will have programs for saving energy. We're working with them now on helping save energy in electrically heated buildings. ComEd, which is our electric utility, Nicor Gas, Peoples Gas, Ameren Illinois Gas and Electricity. These are all utilities that offer their own rebate programs for measures like pipe insulation, for lighting, for all sorts of things. So we help building owners apply for these rebates. And if they're trying to do deeper measures that rebates don't really cover at all, we help them find other funding opportunities. We work with a corporation that looks at low-interest loans that they give to building owners in low-income areas. And we issue grant funds ourselves through the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, which basically the way that is funded is it takes these energy efficiency fees that are on utility bills and distributes them to energy efficiency programs like ours, and we use those to give out grants and claim savings on that. So that's more or less what my life is like as an energy auditor. It's dealing with all sorts of stakeholders from a building owner all the way up to the city and the state, and making sure that whatever's getting done is cost effective and will make a huge difference in the building owner and their tenants' lives. So that was kind of my end note. Next week, same time, same place, we'll be talking about energy modeling and whole building design, which is, I believe, mainly Rob's topic. And there's an assignment for that, which is on the course syllabus, which I've linked there. And these slides, you should have access to these slides, so feel free to take a look at them. And we're recording the session, and we'll be posting it online within the next 48 hours. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise them now. Otherwise, I think that'll be it for today. Thank you for joining us.